Imagine a figure lurking in the fog-choked alleys of Victorian London, a shadow that strikes without warning, leaving a trail of fear and mystery that has haunted the world for over a century. He wasn't just a killer. He was a phantom who terrorized a city, evading capture and vanishing into legend. This is the story of Jack the Ripper, the unknown predator whose crimes plunged Whitechapel into a nightmare of suspicion and dread. London, 1888. The East End was a labyrinth of poverty and despair, where gas lamps flickered weakly against the thick fog that rolled in from the Thames. Whitechapel's streets were crowded with immigrants, laborers, and the desperate, their lives a daily grind of survival. Horse-drawn carriages clattered over cobblestones, while the air hung heavy with the stench of sewage and coal smoke. It was a place where hope went to die. And in this shadows, a killer emerged, his identity as elusive as the mist itself. Jack the Ripper, as he would come to be known, was a ghost in human form. No one knows who he was, a doctor, a butcher, a royal. The theories swirl like the fog, but the man behind the name remains an enigma. Some say he was a local, familiar with the alleys. Others whisper of a foreigner driven by madness. "He was one of us," a Whitechapel resident muttered, eyes darting nervously. That's what made him so terrifying. The Ripper's reign began in the summer of 1888, a time when Whitechapel was already plagued by hardship. The Industrial Revolution had drawn thousands to London, but jobs were scarce, and the poor huddled in slums where disease and hunger stalked every corner. Women like Marianne Nichols turned to the streets for survival, their lives precarious and forgotten. Nichols, 43, was the first canonical victim, found on August 31st in Bucks Row, her body discovered by a carman on his way to work. "She was just lying there," he said, his voice trembling, "like she'd been discarded." The attack was swift and calculated, leaving the police baffled. Inspector Frederick Aberline, a seasoned detective with a mustache as sharp as his mind, led the investigation. "This isn't a common crime," he said, studying the scene. "There's something deliberate here." The Ripper's method was precise, his knowledge of anatomy suggesting a medical background. He struck at night, when the fog was thickest, vanishing before the cries could alert anyone. "He's a phantom," a constable whispered, fear creeping into his voice. The second victim, Annie Chapman, 47, was found on September 8th in Hanbury Street. She'd been a mother, a wife, now reduced to scavenging for scraps. She was trying to turn her life around, her sister said, tears streaming. The Ripper's boldness grew. He killed in broad daylight, behind a fence where anyone could have heard. The press exploded, dubbing him Leather Apron at first, then Jack the Ripper, after a letter arrived at the Central News Agency. "Dear Boss," it read, signed with a flourish, "I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet." Whether genuine or a hoax, the name stuck, fueling the terror. London panicked. Women walked in groups, men armed themselves with sticks, and the fog seemed thicker, more menacing. "You couldn't see your hand in front of your face," a resident recalled. And in that darkness, he was waiting. The police flooded the streets, but the Ripper slipped through, his knowledge of the labyrinthine alleys giving him an edge. Vigilante groups formed, patrolling with lanterns and clubs. "We'll catch him ourselves," one leader declared, but their efforts were futile. The double event on September 30th amplified the horror. Elizabeth Stride, 44, was found in Dutfield's yard, her life cut short mid-conversation. "She was a kind soul," a friend said, voice choked. Mere minutes later, Catherine Eddowes, 46, was discovered in Mitre Square, her body arranged in a way that hinted at the killer's twisted artistry. "He's taunting us," Aberline said, his face pale. The Ripper's letter had promised double event this time, and he'd delivered, leaving the police scrambling. Queen Victoria herself weighed in, demanding action. "This can't go on," she wrote, her words a royal decree. The pressure mounted, with Scotland Yard bringing in bloodhounds and profiling suspects. "He's educated," a doctor theorized. "Perhaps a surgeon?" Suspects ranged from a Polish immigrant to a royal physician, but none stuck. The Ripper's anonymity was his greatest weapon, turning every man into a suspect. Whitechapel's women lived in fear, their nights a vigil of locked doors and hushed whispers. "You didn't walk alone," one said, her eyes wide. "Not after dark." The Ripper's crimes weren't just murders. They were a psychological siege, eroding trust and spreading paranoia. "He's one of us," people muttered, eyeing neighbors with suspicion. The fog became a symbol of the unknown, a cloak for the killer's deeds. The final canonical victim, Mary Jane Kelly, 25, was found on November 9th in her miller's courtroom. She'd been a vibrant Irish immigrant, dreaming of a better life. "She had such spirit," a friend said, voice cracking. The scene was the most disturbing yet, the Ripper taking his time in the privacy of her home. "He's escalating," Aberline said, his voice grave. After Kelly, the killings stopped. Or did they? Some believe he claimed more, others that he fled or died. The mystery deepened, the fog lifting but the shadow remaining. Jack the Ripper's terror transformed Whitechapel. The police reformed, forensics advanced, and the world learned the face of serial evil. But the man himself remained a ghost, his identity a riddle that taunts us still. In Part 2, we'll delve into the investigation's twists and the suspects who danced in the spotlight. Whitechapel's alleys were no longer just streets. They were a battleground where fear reigned supreme. Jack the Ripper had struck, leaving a trail of victims and a city gripped by panic. His name, scrawled in a taunting letter, was now a curse whispered in every tavern, every tenement. The police scrambled, the press fanned the flames, and the fog seemed to thicken, hiding a killer who moved like a wraith. Whitechapel in September. 1888 was a cauldron of dread. The murders of Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, and Catherine Eddowes had turned the East End into a place of locked doors and sleepless nights. The double event of September 30th had pushed the city to breaking point, with 2 women slain in a single night, their lives snuffed out in the fog-choked alleys. "He's not human," a street vendor whispered, clutching a knife under his coat. The Ripper's precision, his knowledge of anatomy, his ability to vanish, suggested a mind both brilliant and unhinged. "He knows these streets better than we do," Inspector Frederick Aberline said, his voice heavy with frustration. The police were drowning. Scotland Yard faced a storm of public outrage, with newspapers like The Star blasting their failures. "The police are helpless," one editorial sneered, "while a fiend stalks our women." Aberline, a dogged detective with a reputation for tenacity, led the charge, but the Ripper was a ghost. The fog was his ally, cloaking his movements as he slipped through Whitechapel's maze of courts and passages. "We're chasing shadows," a constable muttered, his lantern flickering in the mist. The Metropolitan Police doubled patrols, their boots echoing on cobblestones, but the killer struck and vanished, leaving only dread in his wake. The investigation was a tangle of clues and dead ends. The Ripper's letters, whether his or hoaxes, poured into newsrooms and police stations, each one stoking the panic. The Dear Boss letter, received on September 27th, had coined his name, its mocking tone chilling. "I am down on certain women, and I shan't quit, ripping them till I do get buckled." Another, the Saucy Jackie postcard, arrived after the double event, boasting, "You'll hear about Saucy Jackie's work tomorrow." A third, the From Hell letter, came with a grisly parcel, a piece of kidney claimed to be Eddowes. "He's playing with us," Aberline growled, slamming the letter down. True or not, the messages turned the Ripper into a specter, his presence felt in every shadow. The police tried everything. Bloodhounds were brought in, their noses sniffing for traces in the fog, but the dogs faltered in the crowded slums. Detectives interviewed hundreds, barmaids, butchers, anyone who might know something, but the Ripper's anonymity held firm. "He's one of us," a dock worker said, eyeing his neighbors. "That's what makes it worse." Vigilante groups formed, their lanterns cutting through the mist as they patrolled. The Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, led by George Lusk, demanded answers. "We'll find him ourselves," Lusk declared, but their bravado yielded nothing but more fear. Suspects emerged like ghosts in the fog, each one scrutinized and discarded. Montague Druitt, a barrister with a troubled mind, was seen wandering Whitechapel. He drowned himself in the Thames that December, sparking whispers. "He fits," a detective mused, but no evidence linked him. Aaron Kosminski, a Polish barber with a hatred for women, was another name. "He's mad enough," a neighbor said, "but proof's another thing." Joseph Barnett, Mary Kelly's lover, was questioned after her murder. His grief seemed genuine, but his temper raised eyebrows. Even Prince Albert Victor, the Queen's grandson, was rumored, a wild theory fueled by his proximity to London. "Royal or pauper, we'll get him," Aberlin vowed, though his voice betrayed doubt. The press fanned the flames, turning the Ripper into a sensation. The Illustrated Police News splashed lurid sketches across front pages, depicting a cloaked figure with a gleaming knife. "Jack the Ripper strikes again," headlines screamed, selling papers by the thousands. The public devoured the stories, equal parts horrified and fascinated. "He's a devil," a flower seller said, clutching her shawl. "But you can't stop reading about him." The Ripper became a myth in his own time, a boogeyman who haunted dreams and dinner tables alike. Women in Whitechapel lived in terror. "You didn't walk alone," a seamstress said, her eyes darting to the alley's edge. "Not after sunset." They carried whistles, locked their doors, and whispered prayers against the fog. The Ripper's crimes weren't just murders. They were a siege on the soul of a community. "He's taken our safety," a mother said, hugging her daughter. Men, too, felt the weight, their suspicion turning neighbors into strangers. "Anyone could be him," a pub landlord muttered, polishing glasses with a trembling hand. The police tried new tactics. They canvassed hospitals, suspecting a doctor or surgeon, but found nothing. They dusted crime scenes for fingerprints, a new science, but the Ripper left no trace. "He's too clever," Aberline said, rubbing his temples. The Home Office demanded results, Queen Victoria herself urging action. "This must stop," she wrote, her words a royal command. But the Ripper didn't answer to queens or cops. He answered only to his own dark urges. The terror peaked with Mary Jane Kelly's murder on November 9, 1888. Her death in the privacy of her miller's courtroom was the Ripper's most brazen act. "She was one of us," a friend said, voice breaking, "always singing." The scene shook even hardened detectives, its brutality a final taunt. After Kelly, the killing stopped, or seemed to. "He's gone quiet," a constable said, but is he gone? Some believed he'd fled London, others that he'd died or been locked away. The mystery deepened, the fog holding its secrets. Whitechapel tried to heal, but the wounds were deep. The Ripper's reign had exposed the city's underbelly, poverty, neglect, a system that failed its poorest. His crimes forced change, better policing, new forensics, a spotlight on the East End's plight. But the man himself remained a shadow, his identity a puzzle that taunted the world. In Part 3, we'll follow the investigation's final days and the theories that keep Jack alive. Whitechapel's fog clung to the cobblestones like a shroud, hiding a killer who'd turned a city into a battlefield of fear. Jack the Ripper's name was a curse, his crimes a wound that bled through London's heart. The murders of Marianne Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly had left the East End trembling, its people locked in a nightmare with no end. The police were desperate, the public enraged, and the killer still a phantom. The morning of November 9, 1888, marked the peak of Jack the Ripper's horror. Mary Jane Kelly, 25, was found in her tiny room in Miller's Court, her life extinguished in a brutal act that shook even the most hardened detectives. "She was so young," a neighbor whispered, her voice cracking, always humming a tune. Unlike the others killed in fleeting moments in alleys, Kelly's murder was private, deliberate, as if the Ripper had savored his time. "He wanted us to see this," Inspector Frederick Aberline said, his face pale as he left the scene. The press called it a masterpiece of evil, and Whitechapel's fear turned to despair. "He's unstoppable," a barmaid muttered, clutching her shawl. The Metropolitan Police were drowning in pressure. Scotland Yard faced a barrage of criticism, with newspapers like The Times demanding answers. "The police are outmatched," an editorial spat, fueling public outrage. Aberline, sleepless and haggard, pored over reports, his desk buried under sketches, witness statements, and those taunting letters. The From Hell letter, with its grisly kidney parcel, haunted him. "Whether it's him or not, it's working," he growled, rubbing his eyes. The police doubled their patrols, their lanterns cutting through the fog. But the Ripper was a step ahead, his knowledge of Whitechapel's alleys unmatched. "He's laughing at us," a constable said, his voice tight with frustration. Investigators chased every lead, no matter how thin. They interviewed surgeons, suspecting the Ripper's anatomical skill pointed to a medical background. "He knows how to cut," a coroner noted, examining evidence. But hospital records yielded nothing. They questioned butchers, barbers, even sailors fresh off the docks, but the trail went cold. Bloodhounds, a desperate experiment, sniffed the alleys, but found only mud and misery. "We're grasping at shadows," Aberline admitted, his voice heavy. The Home Office, under Charles Warren's leadership, faced royal scrutiny. Queen Victoria herself wrote, "This must be stopped," her words a command that echoed through Scotland Yard. The suspects multiplied, each one a fleeting hope. Aaron Kosminski, a Polish barber with a troubled mind, was a favorite. "He hates women," a neighbor whispered, "lives like a ghost." But no evidence pinned him. Montague Druitt, a barrister who drowned himself in the Thames that December, was another. "He was in Whitechapel too often," a detective mused, but his death didn't stop the speculation. Joseph Barnett, Mary Kelly's lover, was grilled. His grief seemed real, but his temper raised doubts. "I loved her," he sobbed, fists clenched. Even wild theories, like Prince Albert Victor or a secret society, swirled, each dismissed but adding to the myth. "We're chasing a name, not a man," Aberline said, slamming his fist. The public's fear morphed into paranoia. Whitechapel's residents saw the Ripper in every stranger. "You didn't look men in the eye," a seamstress said, her voice low. Women carried knives, men formed vigilante groups, their lanterns flickering like fireflies in the fog. The Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, led by George Lusk, patrolled with grim determination. "We'll find him," Lusk vowed, but their searches turned up only drunks and petty thieves. The fog itself became the enemy, a cloak that hid the killer's face. "It's like he's part of it," a dock worker muttered, peering into the mist. The press fed the frenzy. The Illustrated Police News sold thousands with lurid headlines. "Ripper strikes again." Sketches of cloaked figures and terrified women filled front pages, turning horror into profit. "He's a sensation," a newsboy said, waving a paper. The public devoured the stories, torn between dread and fascination. "He's a devil, but you can't stop reading," a flower seller admitted, her hands trembling. The Ripper's letters, real or fake, kept the terror alive. "I'll clip the lady's ears off next," one promised, and London held its breath. After Kelly's murder, the killings stopped, or seemed to. "He's gone quiet," a constable said, wary. Some believed he'd fled to America, others that he'd died or been locked in an asylum. "He could be anywhere," Aberline said, his voice hollow. The investigation dragged on, but clues dwindled. By 1889, the police scaled back, their resources drained. "We did all we could," Warren said, but the words rang empty. The Ripper had vanished, leaving only questions. Whitechapel bore the scars. The murders exposed the East End's poverty, its forgotten women, its broken system. "These women were invisible," a reformer said, until he made them headlines. Charities sprang up, pushing for better housing, better lives. The police adopted new methods, photography, early forensics, but the Ripper stayed ahead, a pioneer of evil. He changed how we hunt, a detective said, studying a crime scene sketch. The term serial killer wouldn't exist for decades, but Jack the Ripper gave it shape. The mystery grew, fueled by silence. Who was he? Why did he stop? He's still out there, a barmaid whispered, eyes darting. The fog of Whitechapel held its secrets, and the Ripper's shadow stretched longer, a legend born of terror. Families of the victims grieved, their pain a private wound in a public spectacle. She was my sister, Annie Chapman's brother said, voice breaking. Not just a story. London tried to move on, but the Ripper's grip lingered. His crimes were a mirror, reflecting society's failures and fears. The hunt for him wasn't over. It was just beginning, in the minds of those who'd never forget. Whitechapel's fog no longer hid a killer, but his shadow lingered, a specter that refused to fade. Jack the Ripper's reign of terror, 5 canonical murders in 1888, had left London scarred, its people haunted by a phantom who'd vanished as swiftly as he appeared. The police were exhausted, the public gripped by fear and fascination, and the mystery of his identity grew darker with each passing day. By 1889, Whitechapel's streets were quieter, but the silence was uneasy. The murders of Marianne Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly had stopped as abruptly as they began, leaving a void filled with questions. "He's gone, but where?" a constable asked, peering into the fog that still cloaked the East End. Some believed Jack had fled, perhaps to America, where similar crimes surfaced in later years. Others whispered he'd died, perhaps by his own hand, like suspect Montague Druitt, who drowned in the Thames. Or he's locked away, Inspector Frederick Aberline mused, in an asylum, laughing at us still. The truth remained elusive, a puzzle with no final piece. The investigation, once a frenzy, petered out. Scotland Yard scaled back, their resources drained by fruitless searches. Aberline, his mustache grayer, his eyes weary, kept the Ripper's file open, but leads were scarce. "We chased a ghost," he admitted, his voice heavy with defeat. The police faced scathing criticism, the teams called them incompetent, and the public agreed. "They let him slip away," a dock worker spat, clutching a pint in a Whitechapel pub. Yet the case had forced change. Photography, early fingerprinting, and crime scene preservation emerged, primitive but groundbreaking. "He made us better," a detective said, studying a faded sketch. But at what cost? Whitechapel bore the deepest scars. The murders exposed the East End's misery, poverty so crushing it left women like Nichols and Kelly with no choice but the streets. "They were invisible," a reformer said, her voice fierce, until he made them headlines. Charities sprang up, offering shelter and hope to the destitute. The Salvation Army opened homes for women, their doors a shield against the fog. "We failed them," a priest said, his sermons now pleading for compassion. The Ripper's crimes held a mirror to society's failures, forcing London to confront its neglect. The victims' families carried private wounds. Annie Chapman's sister wept at her grave, whispering, "You deserved better." Mary Kelly's friend, who'd heard her sing in happier days, avoided Miller's Court, unable to face the memories. "She was my light," he said, voice breaking. Their grief was drowned by the public's fascination, their loved ones reduced to chapters in a grim tale. "They're not just his story," a brother said, clutching a locket. "They were ours." The Ripper's legend grew, fueled by the mystery of his identity. The press, once a spark for panic, now spun tales of intrigue. The Illustrated Police News sold thousands with headlines like, "Who is Jack?" Sketches of a cloaked figure with gleaming eyes became iconic, a boogeyman for the ages. "He's more than a man now," a newsboy said, waving papers. The letters, real or hoaxed, kept his voice alive. "Dear boss," one began, its taunts etched into history. "I'll be back," it promised, and though he never was, the fear lingered. Suspects multiplied, each a thread in the tapestry of speculation. Aaron Kosminski, the troubled barber, remained a favorite. His descent into madness fueled theories. but evidence was thin. "He's the type," Aberline said, "but we need more." Montague Druitt's suicide made him a convenient scapegoat, though his family swore his innocence. "He was gentle," his brother insisted. Joseph Barnett, Mary Kelly's lover, faced scrutiny, his temper a red flag, but his alibis held. Even outlandish theories, a royal cover-up, a vengeful doctor, captured imaginations. We'll never know, a historian sighed, and that's what keeps him alive. The Ripper reshaped culture. He birthed the modern serial killer, a term unborn in 1888 but defined by his shadow. His crimes inspired literature. Sherlock Holmes's deductive genius owed a debt to the Ripper's elusiveness. "He's the villain we couldn't catch," a writer said, penning a thriller. By the 20th century, films and books immortalized him, from The Lodger to countless documentaries. "He's our dark fascination," a director said, counting ticket sales. Tours of Whitechapel sprang up, guides pointing to Buck's Row and Miller's Court. "This is where he struck," one said, as tourists shivered, half thrilled, half horrified. The psychological toll lingered. Whitechapel's women never fully trusted the night again. "You felt him, even years later," a seamstress said, clutching her keys. Men, too, carried the weight, their trust in neighbors fractured. "Anyone could have been him," a pub landlord said, his eyes scanning the room. The fog, once just weather, became a symbol of dread, a reminder of the killer who used it as a cloak. Globally, the Ripper's shadow stretched. His case influenced policing worldwide, from New York to Sydney, as detectives studied his methods. "He taught us what evil looks like," an FBI profiler said decades later. The term serial killer entered the lexicon, shaped by his precision and anonymity. "He was the first," a criminologist noted, "the one who showed us the monster next door." Jack the Ripper's identity remains a void, but his impact is undeniable. He exposed society's cracks, poverty, neglect, fear, and forced it to mend, however slowly. His victims, once forgotten, became symbols of resilience, their names etched in memorials. "They're not his," a reformer said, unveiling a plaque. "They're ours." The fog of Whitechapel has lifted, but the questions remain. Who was he? Why did he stop? The answers are lost, but the shadow endures, a chilling reminder that some evils wear no face.